On April 22nd, 1951, on a frozen Korean hillside, 900 Filipino soldiers stood in the way of an enemy force that should have erased them. They were young, under equipped, outnumbered. By dawn, many would be wounded, some would be dead, but an entire United Nations line would still be standing. This is not a story about luck. It is a story about Filipino resolve, forged in World War II, tested again in Korea. This is the Battle of Yultong, where 900 Filipinos refused to break against all odds. This is not just a Korean War story. It is a continuation of a Filipino war story, one that began with invasion, occupation, and resistance. For these men, Korea was not a first fight, it was the next one. By spring of 1951, the Korean War had changed character. China had entered the war in force. Its People's Volunteer Army moved the way Filipinos recognized immediately, on foot, at night, without warning. The Chinese Spring Offensive was underway. Along the hills near Yultong in Incheon, South Korea, the United Nations defensive line narrowed dangerously. This sector was held by the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division, and directly anchoring a critical position was the 10th Battalion Combat Team of the Philippine Expeditionary Forces to Korea, or the 5th DOC, 900 Filipino volunteers. Many of these soldiers were veterans of World War II. They had fought Japanese occupation. They had lived as guerrillas. They had survived with little food, no air support, and broken supply lines. They already knew what it meant to hold ground when retreat felt safer. Yultung would demand the same discipline under colder skies. 900 Filipinos facing Chinese forces estimated at 10,000, maybe more, elements of the People's Volunteer Army pressing hard across the line. No armor support, limited artillery. If Yultung collapsed, the UN flank would be exposed. The mission was clear: hold the position, delay the enemy, prevent a breakthrough. No promise of reinforcement, no guarantee of survival, only responsibility. Night fell. The artillery began. Chinese mortars pounded the ridge lines. Shells tore into Filipino positions. And under cover of darkness, infantry waves advanced uphill. On the forward slope stood Jose Arteaga Jr., a young lieutenant and West Point graduate. His orders were simple: hold the hill. When communications failed, when nearby Allied units withdrew under pressure, Arteaga did not retreat. Under relentless attack, Arteaga moved across exposed grounds. He directed fire. He steadied shaken men. He rallied his soldiers under mortar blasts and machine gun fire. He understood the stakes. If his position collapsed too quickly, the entire sector would unravel. Wave after wave hit Filipino positions. Foxholes were overrun, then retaken. Wounded soldiers refused evacuation. Medics worked under fire. There was no dramatic charge. It was disciplined resistance. Elsewhere on the line, the situation worsened. Some Filipino elements became isolated. Orders came to withdraw to more defensible ground, but withdrawing meant leaving wounded and dropped men behind. That was unacceptable. This is where Conrado Yap steps forward. Captain Yap commanded the heavy weapons company. He knew men were cut off. Withdrawal without them meant capture or death. So, he chose something else. Against overwhelming numbers, Yap led a counterattack into enemy-held ground. Machine guns fired at point-blank range. Mortars crashed around them, but Yap kept advancing, directing fire, pushing forward. They broke through. Filipino soldiers reached their trapped comrades. They evacuated the wounded. They recovered the fallen. The counterattack disrupted the Chinese assault and bought precious time for the larger UN withdrawal. In the middle of the assault, Captain Conrado Yap was struck down. He died on the battlefield he refused to abandon. By dawn, the 10th Battalion Combat Team had absorbed repeated assaults. Though forced to reposition under orders, they had completed their mission. 12 Filipinos were killed, 38 wounded, 6 missing. But enemy losses were far heavier, with some accounts reporting over 500 killed, maybe more. More importantly, the Chinese advance stalled. The UN line held. Captain Conrado Yap received the Philippine Medal of Valor, the nation's highest military honor. He was also awarded the U.S. Distinguished Service Cross and South Korea's Order of Military Merit. Lieutenant Jose Artiaga Jr. received the Distinguished Conduct Star for his steadfast defense. Yultong was not a battle of sweeping maneuvers. It was a fight for a hill in the dark, under chaos, a test of discipline and decision, repeated again and again. To stand when retreat felt easier. Filipino soldiers had done this before, in jungles, in mountains, against occupiers who believed numbers guaranteed victory. Yultong followed the same tradition. Hold, delay, endure. The battle protected the flank of the UN line. It prevented a broader collapse in that sector. It strengthened military bonds between the Philippines and South Korea. Memorials now stand in names carved in stone. Yet outside military circles, Yultong is rarely mentioned because collective heroism is harder to package, because discipline doesn't look dramatic, and because some sacrifices were never meant to be loud. At Yultong, Filipino soldiers prove something history keeps relearning, that courage doesn't depend on numbers, that resolve can stop momentum, and that sometimes holding the line is the most decisive act of all. Captain Conrado Yap chose to advance when survival meant withdrawal. Lieutenant Jose Artiaga Jr. chose to hold when the line wavered. 900 Filipinos chose not to break. The Battle of Yultong is not remembered for how many enemies were killed. It should be remembered for how many lives were saved. Because Filipino valor has never depended on recognition. It has always depended on resolve. And at Yultong, that resolve held the line. Before this story ends, it needs to be said clearly and without qualification that men of the Philippine Extraordinary Forces to Korea did not fight for recognition. They fought because they understood what it meant to stand when others depended on you. Many of them were already veterans of World War II. They had survived occupation, they had fought as guerrillas, and they had rebuilt their lives from ruins. And when another war called, far from home, in a land not their own, they volunteered again. At Yultong, they did what Filipinos had done before. They held, they delayed, they endured, not for glory, not for headlines, but so that others could live. To the FEFTOC veterans, to those who returned home, and to those who did not, your discipline held a line history almost forgot. Your sacrifice saved lives you would never mend. And your courage, carried from World War II into Korea, proved that Filipino valor does not end with one generation. It endures. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, like, and share. Help me grow my channel.